Howdy folks, it's Pride Month, so you know what that means. We've got to talk about The Mummy. The problem with The Mummy lies within The Mummy itself. It just isn't as visually interesting or complex as the other classic movie monsters, which makes it a lot harder to work with. Take Dracula, for example. He's a charismatic figure who can transform, seduce, and manipulate. Then there's the Wolfman, who offers a sort of primal terror mixed with tragic humanity. Frankenstein's monster embodies a more existential horror that questions science and nature. It helps that two of those, Dracula and Frankenstein, are based on novels, of course. By contrast, the Mummy is either a shambling corpse wrapped in bandages or a human-looking sorcerer who could really be any generic villain in a robe. The 1999 Mummy gets past the first problem by just not having him covered in wrappings, but then what we get is a CGI monstrosity that most evokes a badly rendered zombie turd. Say what you will about the rest of the film, but that change is a pretty negligible one. Anyway, this limitation creates a sort of storytelling bottleneck. When wrapped or in his zombie state, the Mummy is essentially a walking prop. When unwrapped or reskinned and taking human form, the character loses its distinctive monster identity. Either way, he doesn't offer the same visual or narrative punch as the other Universal monsters. Even looking at just the 1999 Mummy, it's easy to see how the franchise relies a bit too much on big CGI spectacle. This was perhaps at its worst with The Mummy Returns, which features predominantly computer-generated enemies, including the monkey-like pygmies and the Army of Anubis, both of which look like elements from a PlayStation cutscene. The key takeaway here is that filmmakers see how the character of the Mummy lacks the practical, iconic presence of other monsters, and so they compensate with digital spectacle, sometimes to the detriment of the story. Sticking with the 1999 version, I should probably reassure you that I do like that version of the Mummy. In fact, I'd say it's probably the best version. That's not just me lapping it up for being a bisexual icon of a flick in which seemingly everyone except Benny is exceptionally attractive. It's a rollicking good action-adventure flick that knows where to keep things simple and which contains some gorgeous production design and a killer lead couple in Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. In Letterboxd terms, it's a perfect 3.5 out of 5 film. However, there is a reason for that lack of an extra star and a half, and that's the CGI, man. It's rough. As we saw in the Tom Cruise-led reboot, Mummy movies have always struggled to balance horror and adventure. It's a tough mix to get right. This challenge has persisted across every iteration of the franchise, from the moody 1932 Karloff original to the pulpy Brendan Fraser trilogy to the awkward 2017 reboot. The 1999 film's success came from embracing pulp adventure over pure horror, transforming the story into an Indiana Jones-style romp with heavy supernatural elements. Unfortunately, this approach diminished the Mummy's threatening presence, reducing Imhotep to a special effects showcase rather than a genuinely terrifying monster. Essentially, the film worked despite its titular creature, not because of it. As for the Tom Cruise version, well, the less said about that the better perhaps, but it's worth noting that this interpretation attempted to recapture horror elements while maintaining blockbuster spectacle, but that attempt really only succeeded in highlighting the fundamental problem. The Mummy works neither as a truly scary horror villain nor as a compelling action movie antagonist. Instead, the character exists in a sort of middle ground that satisfies neither genre expectation. It's a bit of a damp squib. Okay, let's talk about the reboot problem. The 2017 Tom Cruise film's failure illuminated a lot of the underlying issues with The Mummy. Despite a massive budget, major star power, and the advent of modern filmmaking techniques, including superior CGI graphics, the movie couldn't overcome the fundamental problems with its central character. The film attempted to modernize The Mummy by making the monster female and tying it into a broader, dark universe of interconnected monster films, which of course never came to be despite a ton of premature casting notices. Most importantly, these changes couldn't address the core issue. That movie's failure effectively killed Universal's rather ambitious plans for their monster universe, demonstrating that star power and corporate synergy can't compensate for a concept that's flawed at its very root. The Mummy's inability to anchor a successful modern franchise says a lot about the character's inherent limitations. Future Mummy projects face a choice: embrace the character's limitations and work within them, or completely reinvent the concept. The first approach might involve smaller-scale atmospheric horror films that emphasize ancient curses and archaeological dread rather than action spectacle. I feel like I've said the word spectacle a lot in this video, but that really is the key word in the franchise. For this take, inspiration could be adapted from the Hammer mummy movies, which were produced from 1959 to 1971. They still suffer from many of the problems inherent in the character, but could provide the necessary inspiration for a proper modern interpretation. This could mean a bigger focus on curses, a la The Ring, thereby placing greater emphasis on the supernatural aspect. The second approach would require fundamental changes to the mummy concept, potentially abandoning the living corpse angle entirely in order to find a more cinematic approach. But then what would make it the mummy? Therein lies perhaps the biggest problem. As soon as you start taking away key elements, the idea of the mummy either falls apart or degrades into a different concept entirely. Point of all this is that the Mummy franchise as a whole has proven to be a bit of a challenge for its creators, whether we're talking the OG 30s version, the Brendan Fraser trilogy, or the much maligned Tom Cruise retooling. Sure, the Fraser films are successful, but, well, minus the third one. But that's not really thanks to the Mummy. It's just that Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, not to mention the great Arnold Vosloo, make for a sexy and entertaining group to watch tackling wild adventures. You could excise the Mummy as a concept, replace it with just about any supernatural entity, and you'd lose almost nothing. The Mummy just isn't that interesting, and therein lies the problem which future filmmakers must contend with. But what do you think? Is the Mummy inherently flawed, or am I full of crap in my attempt at hitting my word count? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching Screen Rant.